Normally in these reviews, I open up with a synopsis of the game, how I found it, and a TLDR mentioning whether I'd recommend buying it or not, since it makes it easy to view in the Patreon preview window as well. But for the second time in a month, we've got a game that lands on the platform of being a fun game that you might want to wait a patch or two before buying it if it interests you. And today, that game is Blade Prince Academy, which I picked up a press key for because I enjoyed the demo a while back. Though you might be wondering what makes it land in that awkward position of wanting a patch. And well, needless to say, my experience was pretty buggy, with more of a late beta feel rather than a release candidate feel. And while the game did get active patches, even in the short testing period, I did break the game a couple times and sent the issues up the chain to hopefully get fixed. And with a quick test after the day 0 patch, they did get a number of them, though there are a few minor ones that are still lingering to get slapped down in the next couple weeks. Now, as far as the game itself, it's actually pretty fun with a handful of concepts I enjoy, and a few I can take or leave. In the end, though, combat is where you'll be spending the majority of your time, so get ready for a lot of real time with pause, for better or worse. Personally, I just ended up playing it much like the first two classic Baldur's Gate games in levels, just doing it real time as much as possible, only pausing for tough encounters, though your mileage with this may vary. This was mostly because the way the pause mechanic works in Blade Prince differs from more cRPG style real time with pause, since instead of having to pause for each new action selection as they resolve, Blade Prince allows you to queue up several actions in a row for execution, or do them one at a time. And while neat, I generally did not find myself using it too much due to it being easier to adapt move by move, as well as having to adjust how enemies decide to approach you, since you can only see your queue and the enemy's current action selection. With the exception of a few attacks, the game does a good job of keeping the combat pacing at a manageable level, even when playing real time, letting you get out of danger zones, move away from melee attacks, etc. as their bars or active areas wind up. As long as you dodge these, it was pretty easy to avoid most status effects. Though if you wanted to apply your own, you did have to deal with similar windups, so I generally found it more effective to engage first and then start setting up combos after that as a sort of second wave. This is also because status effects and combos are pretty much strictly limited to your special skills. The only real bonus effect to your normal attacks just as the normal stuff like basic critical hit, and depending on your positioning, flanking, or backstab damage, which further amplify your hit. Now, I did end up cheesing my setup to make it so that I could rely on those though, with a heavy focus on attack speed, damage, and crit chance on my killer units, since dead enemies can't hurt you. Though I did get punished for my glass cannon ways on a few levels, though that was mostly due to me not getting out of the way of big nasty hits and ending up with a massive stack of bleed or poison chunking my lower life characters down, though I did end up bringing a tank into some of the battles. The enemies on the flip side, while slightly repetitive in their attack patterns, did have their own unique flavors in each faction because of the awesome artistic style on this. It's just dripping in it. Sometimes they even mixed factions in certain zones. This kept their design from being too repetitive despite the limited movesets, since you had the fire mages summoning leeches, the poison gunners summoning dogs, etc., combined with a mix of heavy hitters and big area of effect dudes, as well as some of the more basic bottom tier enemies to get distracting. It is also pretty nice in how it lumps the enemies, since while there is some crossover and mixing, each zone does have a theme. So you'll have fire mages causing burn, summoning leeches, but they'll only be mixed with the minor poison enemies. So you can somewhat plan your builds around the fights in an area and won't be blindsided by that, though you might sometimes be hit off guard by certain character requirements for the story part of a given mission, and you will be made to use all of them at least once, and it never felt super consistent in a zone as to who it would pick. This did mean I would sometimes have to waste a week rest on a character I used a lot since they popped up in the subsequent mission as a requirement, or I'd have to take an under-leveled character into a late game mission because I wasn't a huge fan of their particular playstyle and I had already leveled someone else. Though weirdly, the being under-leveled part isn't as huge of an issue in and of itself, since it mostly limits your skill options, but rather what you'll be missing are character growth items called packs, that are only obtainable by going on missions with the character. So if you have a character that hasn't been on a lot of missions, they're going to just be a weak link in the party. And sadly, at least as of writing this, there is no way to transfer those packs between characters, so you cannot farm it like equipment in other games. Instead, you have to take the character in and choose the packs as you open them. That said, you can go back to old areas and grind out specific packs for the characters if you want to, just by replaying old missions. Personally, I didn't do this a lot, but it is an option that's there and is what I did do to test some of the fixes to bugs that I found along the way, though admittedly, not all of them are testable this way. Being able to go back is also handy in that each zone has its own unique set of packs that it can distribute, each with a theme ranging from poison resistance modification in the first area to bleed and life leech, or even crit and magic damage focus. So if you're a min-maxer and like to get your characters completely maxed out to the equivalent of level 99 in Final Fantasy, the option is there. You just have to do more grinding for it. These packs are also handy to grab because in addition to their natural benefits, you can actually improve them in your base at various levels, starting out fairly weak, but as you upgrade the building, the bonuses can get pretty solid, just like you can upgrade any other buildings to make things easier as well. Though for cards, this is especially useful since you can stack multiples of the same packed card on a character, and at least right now, any buffs you give it apply to all the cards in that stack. That's why these are the cornerstone to making your characters actually powerful, way more so than levels on most characters, with maybe the exception of characters that get things like crit chance or area of effect boosts naturally through leveling, which always felt more impactful than the other boosts to me. That said, there is one last boost you can get, and some people will love it, though personally it wasn't my cup of tea due to the fact that there's a reason I prefer core SMT over Persona, and that is I don't like micromanaging social interactions. And while the last buffs are from friendship meters, with the higher it goes, making your characters work better in missions. This mechanic not being in my primary wheelhouse, in addition to it being super simplified with the only interesting part being the backstory interludes in the garden area, the rest of the friendship text was basically boilerplate outside of a couple characters. This kind of led to me skipping a lot of the dialogue when zipping through it, since I can only read about wanting to get drinks together so many times. The story, as well as the character backstories, thankfully do play out a bit more interesting, even if they are a bit on the tropey side. Now, to avoid spoilers, there are 4 zones, 3 of which you'll likely have noticed on the initial map, and a 4th one that will pop up later, each with its own arc, its own major boss, or even a few minor bosses. All of it basically revolving around saving your city from various threats, each revealing another part of the puzzle about the overall reason they did it. The reason I bring up the tropes, though, is that it leaned really heavily on certain ones, and while good on moderation, one particular one can get a bit under my skin, and that is the sure, I'm the bad guy, but they're worse design, or basically a pass-the-buck version of what I've at least heard called the well-intentioned extremist trope. There is simply a lot of characters being bad, but saying they're only doing it to stop the next bigger bad, or at least it stood out to me when it happened. As far as the character stories on missions and how they're forced in, mostly they just contributed specific lines of dialogue, so honestly it felt more like they should have been an optional discovery rather than a mandated inclusion in many of the cases, with only a few feeling like they were truly mandatory to the scene, such as visiting a specific gravestone or having a specific vendetta against a foe, or a familiarity with navigating a certain zone. A lot didn't fit any of those, though, often just being side commentary to make them feel more included in the story. As far as the characters individually outside of the main story, a few interested me, and there are characters I would have loved to delve deeper into the backstories of simply because they provided much more interesting concepts. Though really, most of them ended up being a bit shallow. Maybe that was just my personal perception, but it did keep me from getting invested in them. Now all that said, I think with some bug fixes, this will be a good enough game to spend a weekend on and get your enjoyment out of it, in about 10 to 12 hours of actual gameplay. I don't think it will really reach Game of the Year or cult classic status, but not everything needs to be that. Really, the main things holding it back for me is that it's a lot of interesting ideas, but none given quite the depth they deserve. I would love to see this, but more. Or if we can't do the but more, trim it down a bit and really delve deeper into specific systems or even story and world building to flesh those out to give me the ability to at least recommend one specific thing as a killer feature rather than just a lot of okay features. Now, if you enjoy these reviews, leaving a like or comment tells YouTube that you want to see more of them, or if you can, just follow the Patreon for free and get emails for them there, since they all release there ad-free and publicly available a week after they're done. You'll find links to the game down below as well, and be sure to keep gaming, have fun, and peace out.